The year is 1940. London burns under relentless German bombardment. Above ground, buildings crumble and fires rage through the night sky. But 20 feet beneath the streets of Westminster, in a secret labyrinth of reinforced rooms and narrow corridors, the fate of the free world is being decided. Welcome to the Churchill War Rooms, the underground fortress that became the nerve centre of Allied operations during World War II. This is not just a story about concrete and steel. This is the story of the hidden command post, where Winston Churchill and his war cabinet orchestrated the defeat of Nazi Germany, where generals plotted invasions, where intelligence officers decoded enemy secrets, and where ordinary men and women worked around the clock in cramped, airless rooms to secure victory. For 6 years, this bunker never slept, its lights never dimmed, and the decisions made within its walls changed the course of human history. By September 1940, Hitler's Luftwaffe had turned its fury on London. Night after night, hundreds of German bombers darkened the skies, dropping thousands of tons of high explosives and incendiary bombs on Britain's capital. The Blitz, as it came to be known, would kill over 40,000 civilians and destroy more than 1 million homes. The British government faced an existential crisis. How could Churchill and his military commanders coordinate a global war effort when their headquarters could be obliterated at any moment? The answer lay underground. Plans for a protected war room had actually begun before the war in 1938, as tensions with Nazi Germany escalated. A site was chosen beneath the sturdy government buildings on Great George's Street in Westminster, just steps from 10 Downing Street and Parliament. The location was strategic, close enough to the centres of power for quick access, yet deep enough underground to provide protection from all but a direct hit from the heaviest bombs. The Office of Works began the urgent task of converting existing basement storage rooms and sub-basements into a bomb-proof citadel. Workers toiled day and night installing a massive concrete slab 3 feet thick above the facility to protect against bomb blasts. They reinforced walls, installed ventilation systems, and created a self-contained world that could function independently from the chaos above. This was no luxury bunker. Resources were scarce, and speed was essential. The rooms were small, the ceilings low, and the corridors narrow, but it would serve its purpose to keep Britain's war leadership alive and operational, no matter what Hitler threw at them. By the time the first bombs fell on London in earnest, the war rooms were ready to receive their most important occupant, Winston Churchill himself. The Churchill War Rooms comprised a complex warren of approximately 21 rooms spread across a basement level. Unlike the grand halls of government above, this was a utilitarian maze designed purely for function. The main entrance was through a modest doorway that led to a series of descending stairs. Once inside, you entered a different world, one of artificial light, recycled air, and constant activity. The layout was carefully planned. At the heart of the complex was the map room, the operational brain of Britain's war effort. Surrounding it were offices for military chiefs, sleeping quarters, communication rooms, and facilities for the essential staff who would spend days, weeks, or even months underground without seeing daylight. The map room operated 24 hours a day, every single day, from the moment it opened in August 1939 until the war's end in August 1945. Here, military officers tracked the position of every convoy, every battle, every troop movement across the globe. The walls were covered with maps marked with coloured pins and strings, showing the disposition of Allied and enemy forces. Banks of telephones connected the room to military headquarters around the world. Intelligence reports flowed in constantly, were analysed, plotted on maps, and then briefed to commanders and politicians. The room was staffed continuously by Royal Marine and Army officers working in shifts. These men and women became masters of their craft, tracking U-boats in the Atlantic, monitoring the Desert War in North Africa, following the Eastern Front's ebb and flow, and later planning the liberation of Europe. Churchill's personal quarters in the bunker were remarkably modest. His bedroom was barely larger than a closet, containing a simple bed, a small desk, and a chamber pot. There was no bathroom attached. Churchill would have to walk down the corridor like everyone else. Despite the cramped conditions, Churchill used this room frequently during the height of the Blitz. His wife Clementine hated the bunker, finding it claustrophobic and depressing, but Winston recognized its necessity. The Prime Minister also had a small office adjacent to his bedroom, though he preferred to work in the more spacious rooms above ground whenever possible. Churchill was never one to hide from danger. He frequently insisted on going up to the roof during air raids to watch the bombing, much to the distress of his security detail and staff. The map room was where abstract strategy became concrete reality. Every merchant convoy crossing the Atlantic, every naval task force, every bomber squadron was represented on these maps and plotting tables. The Battle of the Atlantic, Britain's lifeline, was tracked with particular intensity. Young officers would plot the last known positions of hundreds of merchant ships making the perilous crossing from North America. U-boat positions, when known from intelligence intercepts, were marked in red. When a convoy went silent or reported an attack, the markers would be moved or removed, each one representing hundreds of sailors and thousands of tons of vital supplies. The tension in this room was palpable. Britain's survival depended on these convoys. If the U-boats cut the Atlantic supply line, Britain would starve and be forced to surrender. Every marker on that map represented lives, resources, and hope. The map room staff developed an almost supernatural awareness of the war's rhythm. They could sense when major operations were brewing from the pattern of troop movements and communications traffic. They knew before almost anyone else when battles were won or lost. These junior officers, many of them women from the Women's Royal Naval Service, WRNs, the Auxiliary Territorial Service, ATS, and other services, wielded extraordinary responsibility. They were privy to secrets that could not be shared even with close family. They tracked operations that involved thousands of lives, and they did it all in this windowless room, breathing recycled air, working 12-hour shifts, day after day, month after month. Communication was everything. The war rooms housed an extensive telephone switchboard that could connect Churchill to Roosevelt in Washington, to military commanders in North Africa, to naval headquarters in Portsmouth, to intelligence services at Bletchley Park. One of the most secret installations was the transatlantic telephone room, which housed a secure scrambled line to Washington. This green-painted room, barely larger than a broom closet, contained the equipment for the Sigsaly system, a top-secret encrypted voice communication system. Churchill and Roosevelt used this line for their most sensitive conversations, discussing strategy, coordinating operations, and maintaining the Anglo-American alliance that would ultimately win the war. The technology was so classified that even the operators who facilitated the calls didn't fully understand how it worked. Winston Churchill was not a man built for underground bunkers. He loved fresh air, natural light, his country estate at Chartwell, and the grand rooms of Parliament. The war rooms represented everything contrary to his nature: confinement, artificial light, recycled air. Yet he recognized their necessity and used them when he must. Churchill's relationship with the bunker was complex. During the worst nights of the Blitz, He would reluctantly descend the stairs to conduct meetings or sleep in his small bedroom. But at the first opportunity, he would emerge above ground, sometimes recklessly exposing himself to danger to observe the bombing or to show solidarity with London's suffering population. His famous broadcasts to the nation, those stirring speeches that rallied British morale during the darkest hours, were often recorded in a small BBC studio set up in the bunker complex. From this underground room, his voice would reach millions of listeners across Britain and the world, carrying defiance, determination, and hope. The cabinet room was where Churchill met with his war cabinet to make the most crucial decisions of the conflict. This modest room, with its rectangular table and simple chairs, witnessed debates that shaped history. Here in 1940, the War Cabinet decided to fight on alone after France's fall, rejecting any possibility of negotiating peace with Hitler. Here they debated the deployment of Britain's limited resources. Should fighters defend London or protect shipping? Should troops be sent to North Africa or held for home defence? Here they wrestled with impossible choices, knowing that every decision might cost thousands of lives, but that inaction could cost millions more. Churchill chaired these meetings with his characteristic intensity. He would arrive wreathed in cigar smoke, brandishing papers and maps, challenging his ministers and military chiefs, demanding answers, proposing bold strategies that sometimes seemed reckless, but often proved brilliant. Churchill's working method was demanding and exhausting for his staff. He kept irregular hours, often working late into the night, then sleeping until mid-morning. He would summon staff at any hour for urgent discussions or to dictate memoranda. His secretaries worked in rotation to keep up with his relentless pace. Despite, or perhaps because of, this demanding style, Churchill inspired extraordinary loyalty and dedication. His staff knew they were working for a leader who carried the weight of the world, but never wavered in his determination to achieve victory. In the bunker's cramped corridors and rooms, Churchill built the team and the command structure that would ultimately win the war. The map room provided him with real-time intelligence. The communication systems connected him to allies and commanders, and the protection of the bunker ensured that no matter what Hitler did, Britain's war leadership would survive and continue the fight. Life in the war rooms was unlike anything most of the staff had experienced. Working underground meant losing all connection with natural light and the normal rhythms of day and night. Staff worked in shifts around the clock. The map room never closed, the telephones never stopped ringing, and the war never paused for rest. Sleeping quarters were basic in the extreme. Most staff slept in small dormitories with bunk beds, arranged side by side, offering minimal privacy. The air was perpetually stale, despite ventilation systems. The constant hum of machinery, the clacking of typewriters, and the murmur of urgent conversations created a background noise that never ceased. Many staff members would go for weeks without seeing daylight. They would arrive for their shift, work 12 or 14 hours, sleep in the bunker, then return to their posts. Some reported losing track of whether it was day or night, relying entirely on clocks and duty rosters to maintain their sense of time. Food was simple and often monotonous. A small kitchen and dining area provided basic meals, rationed, of course, like everything in wartime Britain. There was tea, always tea, the fuel that kept the British war machine running. Staff members would grab sandwiches at their desks, eat hurried meals between shifts, and survive on cigarettes and strong coffee during long nights of intensive work. The lack of fresh food, fresh air, and natural light took its toll. Many staff members developed pallid complexions, jokingly referred to as bunker face. Some experienced headaches from the recycled air, others struggled with the psychological impact of prolonged isolation from the normal world. Yet morale generally remained high, Everyone understood the stakes. They were literally at the center of Britain's war effort. The work they did, tracking convoys, decoding messages, briefing commanders, directly contributed to saving lives and winning battles. That sense of purpose sustained them through the hardships. The overwhelming majority of staff in the war rooms were women. The WRNs, the ATS, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAF, and civilian secretaries filled most positions. They operated the map room, worked the telephone switchboards, typed endless reports and orders, decoded messages, and performed 100 other essential tasks. These women came from all backgrounds, some from aristocratic families, others from working-class homes. The war had opened opportunities for women to serve in roles previously reserved for men, and many embraced these responsibilities with enthusiasm and competence. They dealt with information that would have staggered civilians. They knew about upcoming operations before most military commanders. They handled classified material that could change the course of the war, and they were sworn to absolute secrecy. Many women who served in the war rooms never told their families exactly what they did. Even decades after the war ended, they simply said they worked for the government and changed the subject. The burden of keeping such secrets, especially when dealing with information about operations where loved ones might be in danger, was immense. The war room's effectiveness depended heavily on intelligence, knowing what the enemy was doing, planning and thinking. Britain's greatest intelligence asset was also its most closely guarded secret. The codebreakers at Bletchley Park had cracked the German Enigma cipher machine. Bletchley Park, located 50 miles north of London, housed thousands of cryptanalysts, mathematicians and support staff who worked around the clock to decrypt German military communications. The intelligence they produced, codenamed Ultra, provided the Allies with an unprecedented window into enemy plans and operations. This priceless intelligence flowed directly to the war rooms. Special intelligence officers vetted and distributed Ultra material to authorized recipients only. Churchill received daily briefings on the most important intercepts, though even he was not shown the raw decrypts. The risk of inadvertently revealing the source was too great. The map-room staff used ultra-intelligence to track U-boat positions, anticipate German offensives, and plan Allied operations. However, using this intelligence required extreme caution. If the Allies responded too obviously to German communications, the Germans might realize their codes had been compromised and change their cipher systems, cutting off the intelligence flow. This led to agonizing decisions. Sometimes convoys had to sail into danger, even though the war rooms knew U-boats were waiting, because diverting the convoy would reveal that Allied intelligence could read German naval codes. Lives were sacrificed to protect the secret. The intelligence officers in the war rooms lived with these moral burdens daily. They knew information that could save lives, but couldn't always act on it. They coordinated with deception operations to provide plausible alternative explanations for Allied actions, and they maintained absolute secrecy about the source of their knowledge. The war rooms also coordinated with the Special Operations Executive, SOE, Churchill's organization for conducting sabotage and supporting resistance movements in occupied Europe. SOE operated from separate headquarters but maintained close communication with the war rooms for coordinating operations. Agents were dropped behind enemy lines, often to almost certain capture and death. Resistance networks in France, Norway, Yugoslavia, and elsewhere conducted sabotage operations against German infrastructure and military targets. The war rooms tracked these operations and integrated them into broader strategic plans. The connection between intelligence gathering, resistance operations, and conventional military planning was seamless. A resistance group might sabotage a rail line based on ultra-intelligence about German troop movements. The war rooms would track the results and adjust plans accordingly. This integrated approach to warfare, combining conventional forces, special operations, intelligence, and deception, was revolutionary and became a model for modern military operations. By 1942, the war had reached a critical juncture. The initial German blitzkrieg had been halted, but the Allies were far from victory. The Soviet Union bled from fighting the bulk of the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front. The United States had entered the war after Pearl Harbor, but was still mobilizing its vast industrial and military potential. Britain held on, but the question was whether holding on would be enough. In the map room, officers tracked 3 crucial campaigns that would determine the war's outcome. In North Africa, General Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army faced Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps in a deadly dance across the desert. In the Atlantic, the U-boat war reached its peak intensity as German submarines attempted to sever Britain's supply lines. And in the Pacific, American and British forces began the long, brutal campaign to push back Japanese conquests. The Battle of El Alamein in October-November 1942 marked Britain's first major land victory against Germany. Montgomery, carefully supplied and reinforced, based on intelligence coordinated through the war rooms, launched a methodical offensive that broke Rommel's army and sent it reeling back across Libya. Churchill had invested enormous political capital in this campaign. The war rooms buzzed with tension as reports came in from the desert. When victory was confirmed, Churchill famously said, "This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." The map-room staff updated their charts, showing the 8th Army's advance westward. Simultaneously, American and British forces landed in Morocco and Algeria in Operation Torch, the first major Anglo-American combined operation. Suddenly, Rommel faced enemies from both directions. Within months, the Afrika Korps would be destroyed and North Africa would be in Allied hands. In the Atlantic, 1942 and early 1943 saw the U-boat threat reach its peak. German submarines operated in wolf packs, coordinating attacks on Allied convoys. In the map room, officers watched helplessly as markers representing merchant ships disappeared from the plotting tables, each one representing men drowned, supplies lost, and Britain's survival threatened. The Battle of the Atlantic was ultimately won through a combination of factors coordinated from the war rooms. Increased naval escorts, including escort carriers that provided air cover in mid-ocean. Improved anti-submarine weapons and tactics. Ultra-intelligence that allowed convoys to avoid U-boat concentrations when possible. And long-range aircraft that closed the Atlantic gap where submarines had previously operated with impunity. By May 1943, U-boat losses became unsustainable. Admiral Karl Dönitz withdrew his submarines from the North Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic was won. Britain's supply lines were secure. The build-up for the liberation of Europe could begin in earnest. With North Africa secured and the U-boat threat contained, the Allies turned to the most ambitious operation of the war, the invasion of Nazi-occupied France. Operation Overlord, the code name for the Normandy invasion, required planning on an unprecedented scale. Millions of men, thousands of ships and aircraft, mountains of supplies, all had to be coordinated for a single day when the Allies would storm Hitler's Atlantic Wall. The planning consumed the war rooms throughout 1943 and early 1944. Intelligence officers compiled detailed information about German defenses, troop positions, and coastal fortifications. Logisticians calculated how many tons of supplies would be needed daily to sustain the invasion force. Deception planners created elaborate schemes to convince Hitler the invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. Churchill played a complicated role in D-Day planning. He supported the invasion but worried about the casualties it would entail. He remembered the slaughter of World War I and feared seeing Britain's remaining manpower destroyed on French beaches. He questioned whether the operation was premature, whether the build-up was sufficient, whether alternative strategies in the Mediterranean might be preferable. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, established his headquarters in England and coordinated closely with the war rooms. The integration of British and American planning staffs represented an unprecedented level of Allied cooperation. Though Eisenhower made the final operational decisions, Churchill and the War Cabinet retained ultimate political authority over British forces. The tension between political leadership and military command, between British and American priorities, between caution and boldness, played out in meetings in the war rooms throughout the planning period. June 6, 1944. D-Day finally arrived. In the early hours of that momentous day, Allied paratroopers dropped behind the beaches. At dawn, the greatest amphibious invasion in history began, as thousands of landing craft approached the Normandy coast under a massive naval and air bombardment. In the war rooms, staff waited tensely for reports. The first news was fragmentary and confusing. Some beaches met light resistance, others faced murderous fire. Casualties at Omaha Beach were particularly heavy. Throughout the day, Churchill and his staff monitored the operation's progress. By evening, it was clear the invasion had succeeded. Allied forces were ashore, the Atlantic Wall was breached, and the liberation of Europe had begun. The map-room staff began the task of tracking the advance across France, a task that would continue for the next 11 months until final victory in May 1945. After D-Day, the war in Europe became a race against time. The Allies pushed east from Normandy. The Soviets advanced west, crushing German armies and liberating Eastern Europe. Hitler's Reich was caught in a vice from which there was no escape. The war rooms tracked the advance across France, the liberation of Paris, the failed German counter-offensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, and finally the crossing of the Rhine into Germany itself. Each day brought new markers on the maps, new territory liberated, new cities freed from Nazi occupation. But the war was far from over. German resistance remained fierce. Hitler refused all surrender offers and ordered his armies to fight to the death. The Nazi regime collapsed into chaos, but its military machine continued killing until the very end. Even as Germany faced inevitable defeat, new threats emerged. Hitler's vengeance weapons, the V-1 flying bomb and V-2 rocket, rained down on London and other Allied cities. The V-2 was particularly terrifying, a supersonic ballistic missile against which there was no defense. The war rooms had to contend with this new threat while managing the final push into Germany. Intelligence officers worked to locate V-2 launch sites. Bomber commands targeted manufacturing facilities. Ground forces raced to capture launching areas in Holland and Western Germany. The weapons caused significant casualties and damage, but came too late to affect the war's outcome. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Victory in Europe, V-Day, had arrived. London erupted in celebration. Crowds filled the streets, celebrating the end of years of bombing, rationing, fear, and loss. Churchill appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace alongside King George VI and the royal family, acknowledging the cheering masses. In the war rooms, there was relief, exhaustion, and satisfaction. The staff had worked continuously for nearly 6 years, from August 1939, when the map room first opened, until this moment of victory. They had tracked every campaign, coordinated every operation, maintained the nerve center, but helped defeat Nazi tyranny. But there was no time for extended celebration. The war against Japan continued. The map room remained operational, now focused on the Pacific Theatre, where British forces fought alongside their American allies to defeat the last Axis power. While the war rooms had focused primarily on the European theatre, they also coordinated British operations in Asia and the Pacific. British forces, along with Indian, African, and other Commonwealth troops, had fought brutal campaigns in Burma against Japanese forces. The Burma campaign was one of the war's most difficult, fought in jungle terrain against a fanatical enemy with supply lines stretching thousands of miles. The war rooms tracked Field Marshal William Slim's brilliant 14th Army as it drove the Japanese back toward Thailand. This campaign culminated in some of the war's bloodiest battles, but ultimately liberated Burma and prepared the way for the invasion of Malaya. In August 1945, the war ended with shocking suddenness. The United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria. Faced with annihilation, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. The Second World War was over. In the war rooms, the staff could finally rest. The map room, which had operated continuously for 6 years, finally fell silent. The telephones stopped ringing with urgent operational traffic. The maps that had tracked the greatest conflict in human history were preserved as they stood. The war was won. After the war ended, the war rooms were locked and abandoned. The rooms remained much as they had been on the last day of operations. Maps still on the walls, papers still on desks, as if the staff had simply walked out and never returned. For decades, the bunker lay forgotten beneath London, gathering dust, while the city rebuilt above it. In 1948, parts of the complex were briefly considered for use during the Berlin crisis, but the rooms remained largely dormant. It wasn't until 1984 that the Cabinet War Rooms, as they were then called, opened to the public as a museum. Visitors could walk through the preserved corridors and rooms, seeing exactly where Churchill and his staff had directed the war effort. The site became one of London's most popular historical attractions. In 2005, a major expansion added the Churchill Museum, a comprehensive exhibition dedicated to Winston Churchill's entire life and career. The combined Churchill War Rooms now tell the story not just of the bunker, but of the man who led Britain through its darkest hour. The preservation of the war rooms provides an invaluable window into how World War II was actually conducted at the highest levels. Unlike grand military museums showcasing weapons and vehicles, the war rooms reveal the unglamorous reality of command. The cramped rooms, the endless paperwork, the sleepless nights, the burden of decisions that cost lives. Walking through these rooms today, you can almost feel the tension, hear the telephones ringing, sense the weight of responsibility carried by everyone who worked here. This underground fortress, this secret command post, this maze of artificial light and recycled air was where the free world's defense was coordinated. Here, in these modest rooms beneath London's streets, the Allied victory was planned, directed, and ultimately achieved. The map room stands exactly as it was left in August 1945. The maps still show the final positions of Allied forces. The telephones sit silent on their desks. The plotting tables wait for officers who will never return. It serves as a memorial, not to glory and triumph alone, but to the sacrifice, dedication, and sheer hard work of the men and women who spent years of their lives in this underground world, fighting a war with maps, telephones, and determination. The Churchill war rooms remind us that wars are won not just by soldiers on battlefields, but by planners, coordinators, intelligence analysts, and administrators working in obscurity. These rooms were never glamorous. The work was never glorious. But it was essential. Without this command center, without the coordination it provided, without the intelligence it processed, and the decisions made within its walls, the outcome of World War II might have been very different. Today, the war rooms stand as a testament to British resolve, Allied cooperation, and the extraordinary efforts of ordinary people who rose to meet history's greatest challenge. 20 feet beneath the streets of modern London, the past is preserved, waiting to tell its story to anyone willing to descend those stairs and enter the secret bunker where the Allies directed World War II.